If you've ever looked into someone's eyes and felt something was off, even when they told you everything was fine, stay with me for a moment, because the feeling in your chest right now might not be paranoia. It might be your intuition trying to warn you. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and like this video. Not for me, but for the man you're becoming. Because the truth about relationships isn't taught in school. And once you understand female psychology and emotional behavior patterns, you'll never look at relationships the same way again. Let me speak to you not as an enemy of women, but as a psychologist who has spent years studying guilt, attachment, and human behavior. And there's something important you need to understand. When someone betrays a relationship, guilt almost never disappears. It leaks out in small behaviors, tiny cracks in the emotional mask. Most people think cheating is only revealed through obvious evidence, messages, calls, or being caught. But the human mind rarely hides guilt perfectly. Our behavior betrays us long before the truth comes out. And men often miss these signs. Not because you're naive, but because when you love someone, your brain automatically searches for reasons to protect the relationship. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. Your intuition whispers that something isn't right, but your heart fights to keep believing. So you explain away the strange behavior. You tell yourself she's just stressed. You tell yourself she's tired. You tell yourself relationships go through phases. But guilt changes a person in very specific ways. When someone carries the secret of betrayal, their brain goes into emotional defense mode. They start managing their behavior, their tone, even their affection differently. And those changes, subtle as they may seem, create patterns. Patterns that observant men eventually notice. And tonight, I want to walk you through some of these clearest psychological signs that a woman may be carrying the weight of guilt after cheating. Not to make you suspicious of every woman, but to help you understand behavior. Because strong men don't live in denial. They see reality clearly, even when it hurts. And the first sign often begins with something small, something many men ignore completely. One of the earliest behavioral shifts guilt creates is something that feels confusing at first. She suddenly becomes unusually nice, kinder than normal, more attentive, almost as if she's trying harder than she ever has before. To many men, this feels like a good sign. You might think the relationship is improving. Maybe she's being sweeter, more affectionate, or more supportive than usual. She compliments you more. She initiates conversations. She seems eager to please. But psychology tells us something important about guilt. When a person believes they've violated someone's trust, their brain often attempts something called compensatory behavior. In simple terms, they subconsciously try to balance the scales. They know they've done something wrong, so they increase positive behavior to reduce the emotional weight they feel. It's not always calculated. Many times it happens automatically. The human mind hates carrying guilt, so it tries to relieve the pressure. A woman who feels guilty may start doing things she rarely did before. She might cook more often. She may suddenly become more affectionate in public. She might start telling you how much she appreciates you, even if those words were rare in the past. On the surface, this looks like love, but sometimes it's actually emotional repair. You may notice the affection feels slightly different, a little forced, a little too frequent, or appearing suddenly after a period where she seemed distant. Men often miss this shift because it feels positive, and when relationships have gone through tension, any improvement feels like relief. But guilt-driven affection often carries a subtle tension beneath it. It's generosity with a shadow. A person trying to prove to you and to themselves that they are still a good partner. Now understand something clearly. Increased kindness alone does not mean someone has cheated. Healthy partners also show love and appreciation. But when affection suddenly spikes without explanation, especially after emotional distance, psychologists start paying attention because guilt changes motivation. Instead of giving love freely, the person begins giving it to quiet the voice inside their own mind. And when that happens, another behavioral change usually begins appearing at the same time. A strange mix of closeness and emotional distance. Then something strange starts happening that many men struggle to explain. At moments, she feels closer than ever, and then suddenly, she feels emotionally miles away. One day, she's warm, affectionate, attentive. The next day, she seems distracted, quiet, or mentally somewhere else. Conversations feel shorter. Eye contact fades quicker. Her energy shifts in ways that don't match the situation. This emotional inconsistency confuses people, but psychologically, it makes sense. Guilt creates internal conflict. The brain is constantly juggling two realities: the relationship that exists in front of her and the secret she carries behind it. Holding those two worlds at the same time is mentally exhausting. So sometimes she overcompensates with closeness, and other times she withdraws to protect the secret. You may notice moments where she seems deep in thought. Not sad exactly, just distant, like her mind briefly left the room. When you ask what's wrong, the answer often sounds vague. Nothing, I'm just tired. Just thinking about work. It's been a long day. Maybe those explanations are true. Life is stressful. People get distracted. But when emotional distance appears repeatedly without clear reason, psychologists start noticing a pattern. Because guilt often makes people mentally retreat. The mind constantly revisits what happened. It replays memories. It calculates risks. It worries about being discovered. Even when she's sitting next to you, part of her mind may be processing the secret she's trying to carry alone. That's why conversations can start feeling different. Less curiosity, less presence, less emotional depth. Not always, but enough that you feel something shifting. Men often describe this as a strange gut feeling. Not anger, not proof, just a quiet sense that the emotional connection has changed. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Your brain is incredibly good at detecting behavioral changes in people you care about. Humans evolved to read micro-expressions, tone shifts, and emotional energy long before we had language. So when something feels off, it's worth paying attention. Not jumping to accusations, but observing carefully. Because when guilt begins shaping someone's behavior, it rarely stays hidden. The pressure slowly leaks into everyday interactions, and sometimes the next sign shows up in a way that catches many men completely off guard. Instead of becoming distant, she suddenly becomes defensive. One day you ask a simple question, nothing aggressive, nothing accusing, just a normal question any partner might ask, and suddenly the reaction feels way bigger than the situation. Maybe you ask where she was after work. Maybe you mention that she seemed distant lately. Maybe you casually bring up a name or a situation that crossed your mind. Instead of a calm answer, she reacts with unexpected intensity, defensiveness, irritation, sometimes even anger. And it leaves you confused because your question didn't feel like an attack. But psychologically, when someone carries guilt, their brain becomes extremely sensitive to anything that might expose the truth. Even neutral questions can feel threatening. It's not always a conscious decision. The brain enters a protective mode. Think about it like this. If someone is hiding something, their nervous system is constantly scanning for danger. Any small conversation that moves near the hidden topic can trigger a stress response. That stress often shows up as defensiveness. You might hear responses like, "Why are you always questioning me? Don't you trust me? You're overthinking things again." Notice the pattern. Instead of addressing the question itself, the focus shifts to your behavior. The conversation becomes about why you asked rather than what you asked. Psychologists call this deflection. When guilt exists, the brain often tries to redirect attention away from the uncomfortable subject. The fastest way to do that is by turning the spotlight back onto you. Suddenly, you're the one explaining yourself. You're the one defending your intentions, and the original question quietly disappears. Over time, this dynamic can make a man second-guess his own instincts. You might start wondering if you really are overthinking. Maybe you stop asking questions just to avoid tension, and that silence gives secrets more space to hide. Now, again, defensiveness alone doesn't prove betrayal. Everyone has moments where stress makes them react strongly. But when simple, respectful questions consistently trigger defensive reactions, psychologists recognize a pattern worth paying attention to. Because guilt doesn't like curiosity. Curiosity brings light, and guilt survives best in darkness. But here's where things become even more interesting. Sometimes the guilt doesn't just create defensiveness. Sometimes it causes something even more confusing. She begins accusing you. Sometimes the most confusing shift a man experiences isn't distance or kindness or defensiveness. It's when the accusations suddenly start coming your way. You might notice she begins questioning you more than usual. Who are you texting? Why did you like that girl's picture? Why are you home late? At first, it may seem like normal relationship insecurity. After all, everyone has moments where they feel unsure or protective of their partner. But psychology has identified something very interesting about guilt. When a person feels they've done something wrong, their mind sometimes tries to relieve the pressure by projecting that behavior onto others. In simple terms, the brain convinces itself that if you might also be doing something wrong, then their own actions feel less severe. Psychologists call this projection. It's a subconscious way the mind reduces guilt. Instead of sitting alone with the weight of their own behavior, the brain shifts attention outward. Suddenly, they begin scanning your behavior for signs of betrayal. Little things become suspicious. A late reply, a notification on your phone, a new coworker's name they've never heard before. And here's what makes this dynamic so confusing for men. You may have done absolutely nothing wrong, but the intensity of the questioning can make you feel like you're the one under investigation. The emotional tone also changes. The questions might come with irritation or distrust, almost like she's already convinced something is wrong, even when there's no evidence. From a psychological standpoint, this isn't always about you. It can be a reflection of the internal conflict happening inside her. Because guilt often makes people hyper-aware of the possibility of betrayal, even from the partner they hurt. The mind tries to normalize the situation. If he could also do something like that, then maybe what I did isn't so terrible. Again, this behavior alone isn't proof of cheating. Some people naturally struggle with trust due to past experiences or insecurities. But when accusations appear suddenly without a clear trigger, psychologists take notice. Because projection is one of the mind's oldest defense mechanisms, it's the brain trying to escape the discomfort of its own actions. And as guilt grows heavier, another change often begins to appear. One that affects the physical and emotional connection between you. Something shifts in the intimacy between you. One of the most noticeable shifts many men report happens in the area where relationships usually feel the most natural: physical and emotional intimacy. Something changes, and it often happens in one of two directions. Sometimes she becomes noticeably distant. Physical affection decreases. Hugs feel shorter. Kisses feel routine. Intimate moments that once happened naturally start feeling rare or slightly awkward. Other times, the opposite occurs. She suddenly becomes far more physically affectionate than before, initiating closeness more often, showing heightened passion, or trying to create more intimate moments than usual. Both shifts can happen when guilt is involved, and both come from the same psychological tension. When someone has crossed a personal boundary in a relationship, their brain struggles with emotional alignment. The mind begins asking uncomfortable questions internally. Am I still the person he believes I am? Do I deserve this relationship? Can I act normal without revealing anything? For some people, this inner conflict causes withdrawal. Physical closeness starts feeling uncomfortable because it reminds them of the secret they're carrying. Eye contact during intimate moments may feel harder. Emotional vulnerability feels risky, so they pull back. Not always dramatically, but enough that the energy feels different. For others, guilt pushes them toward increased intimacy. They attempt to reconnect physically, almost as if trying to reassure themselves that the relationship is still intact. The brain is seeking emotional reassurance that everything hasn't fallen apart. But even in those cases, something can feel slightly off. The connection may feel less emotionally grounded, or the intensity may appear suddenly, without a clear reason. You might feel affection, yet still sense that something beneath the surface has shifted. Humans are extremely sensitive to emotional authenticity. Even when we can't explain it logically, we often feel when someone's energy or intention has changed. And that feeling deserves attention, not panic, but awareness. Because relationships thrive on honesty and emotional alignment. When those two things become misaligned, the body language, the tone, and the rhythm of intimacy often change first. But perhaps the most powerful sign of guilt isn't what she does toward you. It's what happens when the topic of loyalty or cheating appears in conversation. That moment can reveal more than most people realize. Sometimes the most revealing moment happens in a completely ordinary conversation. Maybe you're watching a movie where a character cheats. Maybe a friend tells a story about betrayal in their relationship. Maybe the topic of loyalty simply comes up during a discussion, and suddenly her reaction feels unusually strong. She might become extremely critical of cheating, speaking about it with intense disapproval, almost as if she's trying to clearly position herself on the right side of the issue. Her tone may carry a sense of urgency, like she wants you to firmly believe she would never do something like that. Or sometimes the reaction is different. She becomes quiet, uncomfortable, quick to change the subject. From a psychological perspective, this moment is important because topics connected to hidden guilt often activate what we call emotional triggers. When the mind hears something closely related to a secret it's carrying, the brain reacts quickly, sometimes before the person even realizes it. You might notice subtle changes, a pause before responding, a sudden shift in tone, a forced laugh, or an overly passionate opinion that feels slightly out of proportion to the situation. These reactions don't automatically mean someone has done something wrong. Everyone has emotional triggers shaped by past experiences. But when a person is hiding something, conversations about honesty, loyalty, and betrayal can create intense internal discomfort. And that discomfort sometimes leaks into behavior. Now, I want to leave you with something important. The goal of understanding these signs is not to turn you into a suspicious or paranoid man. Healthy relationships are built on trust, communication, and emotional maturity. But strong men also refuse to ignore patterns that repeatedly make them question reality. Your intuition is not your enemy. It's a survival tool developed over thousands of years of human psychology. If something in your relationship feels consistently misaligned, the healthiest path is not silent suspicion. It's calm, honest communication, observing behavior, asking respectful questions, creating space for truth to exist. Because the strongest relationships are not built on blind trust. They are built on clear awareness and mutual honesty. And when a man learns to see behavior clearly, without denial, without fear, he becomes something powerful. Not controlling, not suspicious, but emotionally intelligent. The kind of man who understands people deeply and therefore chooses relationships that bring him peace instead of confusion.